Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. My name's Tom Farden. I'm chair and organizer of Grand Rounds, including this festive edition today. As Phil said in his introduction sent on the email, it's the wrong pole for Santa Claus and Santa's grotto, but it is white and full of ice in the Antarctic. Bill was here just at Grand Rounds just a few weeks ago, giving his post-retiral Grand Round talk, which was very well received and a fantastic presentation about years of voluntary work and humanitarian work all around the world. And one of the things that he didn't have time to talk about was his work with the British Antarctic Survey back in the 80s. So I was delighted when he got back in touch with me and said, could he have another slot to talk about it? So absolutely, let's tie it in with Christmas. So his post-retiral talk, Phil Lacoux, now retired, sort of, anaesthetist, is going to talk about his time in the British Antarctic Survey in the late 80s. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or save them to the end, and you can turn your camera and ask him in person. Thanks very much. Phil, with festive decorations behind his head and his son to help with the IT in the background, looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom, and welcome to everybody. And so why should you be interested in this? Well, there's some pretty pictures, and I suppose you pay for it, the British Antarctic Survey. So it gives you some idea as to why you should know a tiny bit about it. Not that it really matters. All I had done when I went to the Antarctic was house jobs and a casualty job, a 6-month casualty job. And I was uncertain then what I wanted to do. And then I saw an advert in the BMJ, and the BMJ will come up again later. And I've always liked the BMJ, but anyway, an advert came up in the BMJ, 4 jobs, 4 applicants, which was rather good. And so I got a job working for BAS. Some of the people on this talk might have voted for Bertie McBoatface as the name of the new ship, which is actually been called the Sir David Attenborough. This is the ship I went down on, the Bransfield. It's now not in service anymore. And yep, that's that part. So yeah, so set off from Grimsby. It was almost like the olden days of leaving, setting off on a big journey. People were on the quay. You could chat to people, almost touch them. They'd all come on board for a drink beforehand. It was a lovely sort of farewell. And this is after a few days just doing a practice in the lifeboats. And obviously you can see that the days were when everybody smoked. That's what the ships look like. And I was one of the FIDs, and FID refers to 2 different things. So the British Antarctic Survey, before it was called that, was called the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey. And before that it was called Operation Tamarind, because it began as trying to keep the Germans out of the Antarctic in the Second World War. But anyway, Falkland Island Dependency Survey, everybody then on board was called the FIDs. So I was one of the FIDs heading south. And it was a marvelous time. Yes, of course, a tiny bit of medicine, but not really. And every now and again, they'd drop 20 or 30,000 pounds of a buoy into the sea to measure salinity and currents and temperature and whatever else. And you'd do quite a lot of painting and stuff around the ship. But it was a very enjoyable time, crossing the equator, having to kiss Neptune's feet, etc. It wasn't long before we'd gone way, way, way south and crossing the Drake's Passage. So Drake's Passage is that thunderous bit of water, big area of water between the bottom of South America and the top of the Antarctic Peninsula. And of course, the Antarctic Peninsula is a continuity of the Andes. And I'll show you a little map in a moment. But Drake's Passage, amazingly big seas. It's the only place, I think, around the world where the waves can go all the way around the world, go all the way around, continue going around on the 40s or the 50s into the 60s latitude. And so the swell there is long, is big. So there's a little picture of the Antarctic. So it's like a great big blob of ice on the bottom of the world. If you look at some of the names there, then you can see Falklands, so close to South America. You can also see South Georgia, the other island that was also occupied during that the Falklands War, and I'll mention a bit about that time as well. So I was on the Antarctic Peninsula, that sticky out arm, and I was about halfway along that at a base called Rothera. I had the lovely chance to actually visit all the other British bases, because there's 5 at that time. There's 5 manned bases in the Antarctic. There's now 4, I think, and mine happened to be the last one to be dropped off, so I was able to see all of the others. So going around these places, I mean, South Georgia, amazing. It's a big island, lots of whaling history, and of course that's the island where Shackleton and his during their journey ended there to the Shackleton rescue. Amazing story. Anyway, wandering albatrosses weigh about 4 or 5 kilograms, and they're enormous birds, quite happy for you to come up close. And lots of this is just another example of the many different facets of science that MSF is involved with. Here the boat is crashing through relatively thin sea ice, maybe just feet thick, and sea ice is a very important part of the whole picture about the Antarctic. So, yep, largest. I'll explain why it fluctuates. Obviously, no indigenous population, down to minus 80 degrees C sometimes. Very windy, the katabatic winds. It's not obviously got the highest things in the world, but as a average, it is the highest because it's a great big plateau, dry. When they work out the actual precipitation, over 90% of the world's ice, so that's all the ice in Greenland, all the ice in the Himalaya, blah, blah, blah. Over 90% of the world's ice is in the Antarctic, and over 70% of the world's fresh water is in the Antarctic as ice. So this is shelf ice. I haven't got a gin and tonic right now, even though I'm retired, but of course 1/8 of my ice cube would be above my gin and tonic and 7/8 below. So this is shelf ice. So it's, in the end, it's actually floating, a lot of this. It'll be anchored at different bits of the underground land, because the actual land part of the Antarctic is a different shape to the shape you just saw. But so this shelf ice is about 15 meters high there. So is 100 and whatever meters down below. And we'll chat a tiny bit about this massive iceberg that has broken off. So now, just talking about fluctuating size of the Antarctic, then the sea freezes around it. And of course, now there's very good graphs to show that less and less of the sea freezes around the Antarctic because of warming, basically. But there can be a maximum extent, a minimum extent of sea ice. And there's also shelf ice, as mentioned there. That shelf that is indicated on that little map isn't actually the Brunt, which is the name of all the different ice shelves down there have different names, Larsen, Brunt, all sorts of names. But that one is close to the Brunt, and it was part of the Brunt that has broken off and is now floating up near the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula and might bump into South Georgia at some point. This gives another idea about how high shelf ice is above the water, because this is the conning tower, the top tower of the ship, of the Bransfield. The captain would sometimes go up to that tiny little area and guide the ship through the difficult sea ice that he was going through. That just gives a feeling as to how high shelf ice is, and then you've got to have another 7/8 of that down below down below the sea level. Now, this is just a little picture of the Antarctic Peninsula. So up at the top there, around the island up there, that's somewhere around there is where this iceberg, which is about the size of Wales, excuse me, has floated to at the moment. It is a breakaway from this Brunt Ice Shelf, as I mentioned, and interestingly, one of the British bases on the Brunt Ice Shelf, one called Halley. And Halley was continuously manned for 40 plus years, excuse me, and is now not manned in the winter because of the degradation, the falling to bits of that ice shelf. The base I was at was at Rotherham, where's the R is. That's what the base looked like. Lived in the light green bit, triple glazed, run heating, well heated, good communications, lots of stores outside because there's not enough place to store things. Everything has to be well marked. This is a picture in the summer, so you can walk around and there's not, obviously in the winter, all covered in snow. And if you've left anything outside and you haven't marked it, then you'll lose it. The satellite connections then was fairly good. I'm sure it's far better now. The dark green store was the sledge store, where lots of activity went, preparing for the next summer when lots and lots of scientists would fly down and go off into the field to do stuff. And of course, Halley is famous. So this isn't Halley, this is rather Halley is famous for the ozone hole and discovering that, and all enormous other numbers of bits of science and stuff. And Rotherham is the one where they do more of the traveling from. Out the back, you can't see it, is another hut, and that's full of a year's food supply because fires down in the Antarctic are surprisingly common. And so they try and make sure they have got food and stuff available in case there was a significant fire destroying one of the big buildings. Fuel in drums, etc. I'm not particularly into aviation, but this is a twin otter. They use those a lot down in the Antarctic. If you look at the wheels, then in fact there's a flat bit beneath the wheels there, so they land on skis, in fact, and they now have other aircraft down there called the Dash 7. And in the olden days, these planes would fly, in fact, from UK, Greenland, Canada, America, South America, and eventually fly back to the Antarctic for their summer season. Now they more often stay down there as they've now got a hard airstrip has been built at Rotherham. Beautiful mountains all around. Some of these are 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 feet. Katabatic winds. So that means just like when you open the fridge and your feet get cold, the cold wind coming down from this high plateau of the Antarctic. And I forget exactly the details of this, but they bent the fuselage of this twin otter and they had to take it to bits and take it out and mend it. And it's been shipped out on little scows out to the main ship. And one of the scows on the new boat on the Sir David Attenborough is called Bertie McBoatface. I didn't have to do much medicine there. There was, I had to mend a tendon, I think, on the way back up on the ship. And there were some people who were a bit sad and seasonally affected, perhaps. The one thing I just went, a man broke his zygoma. Remember, this is 1987, the Falklands War was 82. And so then a big political discussion about how the British government wanted to fly, obviously wanted to fly him out because not something I could sort out. And beside the Chilean base on this George V Island, or King George Island, as it's called, I think, King George Island, up at the top of the Antarctic Peninsula, was also an Argentine base and other bases as well. So it was just an interesting time for me. I just got a magnificent flight up through the Antarctic Peninsula, up through the Lemaire Channel, all incredible, views and places to see. The actual man with his zygoma, he wasn't sober when he was driving his skidoo, and he was back south, in fact, 5 weeks later. So what is there to do there? Well, lots and lots of just having jollies. Here I'm out with a tiny boat with a pathetic seagull engine, but they're very easy to service, I was told, with a friend called Tim, and we're just pottering about looking at little icebergs and stuff on a good day, on a dingle day. But you'd do a lot of woodwork, you'd photography, but also you'd help the plumber or the electrician or whoever was needing help that day. Yes, I did a little bit of research, but really it was just a very, very lovely time. There's usually mid-morning smoko, as they called it. It was obviously a naval term. There wasn't smokers actually down there much in my time. But anyway, smoko, everybody would stop and have a cuppa and a cake or whatever. Okay, good. I'll just try that once more. Good. So, yeah, Antarctica, there's a big Antarctic treaty that lots of countries sign up to. Lots of countries claim it like a cake, bits of segments of the Antarctic, and lots of these segments of the cake overlap. And the Antarctic Treaty says, let's agree that we all ignore everybody else's claims, and nobody and everybody can go everywhere. So, and at the moment, there's no exploitation of minerals, etc. But who knows what will happen? Tourism, and certainly, maybe some people listening have been down to the Antarctic on tourist boats, and yeah, if we have an accident on a tour boat in the Mediterranean, you'll get rescued. It could be very difficult in the Antarctic. Just a reminder again of the shape. So we're again on that Antarctic Peninsula. And all countries try to make claims of what they do. So up at the top of the Antarctic Peninsula, there's this King George Island, and Chileans have sent women down there to have a baby, and many other things have been done to sort of bolster your claim. And so this is British bolstering their claim with a post office just there for the summer, and not really a post office, it's just somebody knew how to do things correctly. And the wildlife. So rich, rich, rich waters. Obviously, the basis of all life there is krill, this, well, I can't remember what krill feeds on, to be honest, but anyway, the little shrimp-like creature. This is a crab-eater seal, Weddell seals. There's enormous, enormous biomass of seal and krill in the Antarctic. Rich, rich waters, so crab-eaters, yeah. Forage down to 400 meters. So and I mentioned this word there, the canine distemper virus. I'll mention it a bit later. So they haven't. I think there's endogenous infection with a virus within the crab-eater seals, and it's not a problem. Here's the krill. The toilets in the base were flushed by seawater, and every now and again the filter would not work, and you would go to the loo and goodness gracious, what did I produce? Oh no, it's krill. It's okay. Okay, so we're now out on the sea in the winter. This might be exactly the same spot as that picture of me in a little boat with friend Tim. This is another one, friend called Clem. He is drilling a hole in the sea ice. He's skied out, or we've skied out there. He's drilling a hole, and to measure the depth of the sea ice. Is it safe for us to start going out onto this amazing playground? The mountain in the background is called Leotard. It's about 7,000 feet, and he's on the same island as I was on, which is called Adelaide Island, a big, big island as part of the Antarctic Peninsula. Sea ice is, fascinating thing itself. I've mentioned how it makes the whole of Antarctica grow in the winter. So when you're driving on a skidoo in the Antarctic, most of the time you're attached to the skidoo, because if you go down a crevasse, then you hope the skidoo's going to wedge somewhere, and then you'll be dangling below it. But when you're on sea ice, then you don't do that. You make sure you're not attached to the skidoo, so that if it did go through, you'll be able to jump off. And that did actually happen to somebody in my year. The ice looked good everywhere, but in fact, they found a thin bit and his skidoo disappeared forever. There's so, and historically, quite a lot of people have died on sea ice because the sea ice breaks up, and of course, then it's an unstable thing, and people die. You can't cross all the leads; it all moves, and historically, that's certainly happened a lot over the years. When I was there one time, we were out and there's a big iceberg and a great big bit came off along quite a way from me. I was standing on the sea ice and I saw the wave coming towards me underneath that ice, lifting me up 2 or 3 feet, went past me and didn't break the ice at all. So it's also sort of a plastic stuff as well. Now then, I was trying to think. Plodders, dim, love fighting, orthopedic surgeons came to mind. I was trying to think of a good similarity, but then they're not 30 to 50 kilos. But this is the mammal that has now left the Antarctic. It left in 1994. Huskies have been down there for maybe 50 years. They've been bred down there. This is one called Spot. And the 2 white dots are not the eyes. These are spots for some reason above the eyes of the dogs. And I'm just going to mention them just because they were a marvelous part of being there. But now they're not. So there's not dogs in the Antarctic anymore. And they were removed for all sorts of reasons. I think it wasn't a good look that we shot seal to feed them. But also around in the mid-90s, there was a strange thing you may remember in the North Sea where a canine distemper virus wiped out lots of the seal population. And so that's a small seal population. The Antarctic seal populations are massive. And so they were worried, is there a connection here? But anyway, no more dogs in the Antarctic. Here we're out with a dog team called the Admirals. The 2 front dogs are called Norman and Tula, and the 2 behind there are called Crabby and Wed. And if I really searched my brain, yes, I think Ursa and Fido. But then if I searched my brain, I might be able to name the other dogs. And it was funny, you'd look out of the window of the base and you'd say, who's that out with Blackie and Rover or whatever? Just because the dogs were easy to recognize, but we would be dressed up in different things on different days. You weren't quite sure who was outside. But anyway, this is the trace. This is the rope trace. The dogs are pulling well. There's some tension in those ropes. It may be midnight or sometime cold. The dogs are not falling into the snow. You can see their feet are nicely on the top. We're up on the glacier somewhere. And we're heading off somewhere just for a weekend jolly. We're pulling about 1,000 pounds. The traditional size of a dog team was about 7 dogs. And here we've overdone it a bit. I think there's 13 there. And yeah, dogs, we had a fantastic history down there. And one of the features of them is they love to fight. And mostly the males, they would fight for dominance. And obviously there's a dog in the middle of that, not doing terribly well. There's a dog's on the left of that picture, thinking, damn, I wish I could get in there, but this rope is stopping me and I'm breaking it up. And the dogs wouldn't bite me at all. Their attitude to us was like a god, and you just grab them by the back legs and pull them apart and shout. And I'm sure I came back from the Antarctic with a much stronger voice than I went. Beautiful camping. And obviously the weather wasn't always beautiful like that. Often it was a bit hazy and you can just about see mountains rising in the background. You may want to turn your sound up for this next bit or down, depending, but there's some sound just going to come through. Don't listen to the words.
Brilliant. The noise in the background.
And so, yeah, they would howl as dogs do, and we'd joke about various things. And it was a lovely sound. One of the sort of jokes a bit about it was, well, who signaled to stop? Because they all seem to stop together at the same time. I'm now just going to talk about that sledge which is sitting there. So they're made of ash. They're tied together, no screws or nails or anything, because that would split. They are flexible because of their nice soft snow you can see, but often you'll be going over sastrugi, over lumpy bits of ice and things, so they could bend and be flexible. You would have a rope hanging out the back with a Turk's head or with a blob on the end of the rope, so that if you fell off the sledge or you tripped or whatever, then you could grab this rope, because once you're setting off, the dogs may not stop for quite a long time. Then, of course, they might stop for a fight. So that is the sledge. And yes, it had a braking system, but mostly you just said, now, and the dogs would stop. When you wanted to get them to go, you'd say, are you ready? And before you'd said up, they were away. And to turn left, then, or to turn right, it was auk. And to turn left, it was ira. And you unfortunately had to roll your R's for that one. And I could never roll my R's, so we can never turn left. The pyramid tents have got an amazing history. There's got a funny, they've got a big valance, a big skirt around them. You put snow on it, or you put boxes or whatever, and weigh it down. But they've also got very good guy system. Oops. Okay, I meant to go down to the next slide. So, just, and I'm afraid, sorry, more dog pictures. So we're now heading back to the base with it on a different day. The base is down on that dark bit on the left, just beyond the snow, and there's a ramp to go down to it. The dogs would often set off like the clappers to charge back to their friends. And you'd have to really try and slow them down on that part. And there, of course, you can see it is during the summer. The sea is not frozen, while during the winter, that would be a very similar sight, but frozen sea. Said I've mentioned the B&J. I've really enjoyed the B&J over the years. This is 12 years ago or something. And since we got and I like the broad approach of the B&J. But anyway, this was, I think it was an editorial, and this was a man who'd been a director of BAS, and obviously there's people debate about warming and stuff, but that was his opinion. Science is overwhelming and settled, and these next numbers are probably a bit stronger than the numbers we sometimes see now, but maybe we're not hearing everything. But that was in 2012. Business as usual, end up at 5, and that's unsurvivable. It's just amazing that we're talking about this now. And when I went to Antarctic, it just wasn't one of the big subjects that we talked about. And I love things that go full circle. So we've now travelled back, and in fact, I've taken the same picture again of us leaving Grimsby. We sailed back to Grimsby, and again welcomed like the old expeditions of the years gone by. When you're coming up the channel, as you're coming up the North into the North Sea and stuff. And in the olden days, he used to talk about something called the channels. And just imagine you've been away for, obviously we had been away for 18 months, but perhaps years gone by in sailing ships, they've been away 2 years or whatever. And a lot of people coming back to UK would be wondering, was my wife alive still? Is my parents alive? Am I still married? Will I have a job? What's going to happen? Do I wish to stay on the boat? Do I want to get off? But anyway, I can remember a lot of interesting feelings going through people where they'd sort of rejoiced in a period of isolation and were then back in society and wondering how it would be. So that's my last slide, and I'll leave that up. And thank you very much for listening. And of course, tomorrow is Midsummer's Day in the Antarctic.
Thanks very much, Phil. That's amazing. I've just been south of the equator, but only so far as to go to Uganda for similar sort of work as you described in the last talk when I was 21. So that's as far south as I've ever managed to get. And we know that the projections on maps distorts things greatly to emphasize the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere. I think I mean that journey is enormous. I mean, how long were you on the boat for to get from God's own country, Grimsby is just about in Yorkshire, to get down to the peninsula?
So coming back was more indicative of how long it would take, because it just took 6 weeks to come back. But going there was 4.5 months because of this complicated, lovely journey we did, including going back up to South America to collect more cargo. And that's why it was just a lovely tour, really. And of course, there are tourist boats down there. It's the sort of thing that one can do these days.
And if one was a core medical trainee looking for something interesting to do, not quite decided what they're doing, there are still work to do out there, is there not?
Definitely. So the advert comes out each year. I'm not sure exactly how many doctors they employ now each year, but they sometimes need somebody for shorter summer periods. And as a ship's doctor, particularly on this amazing new boat, the Sir David Attenborough, because it does so much science and stuff there. But they also need people to stay there for the winter. And that was, for me, was the marvelous time, amazing time. So that still happens. I think now, rather than 4 applicants for 4 jobs, there's often 30 applicants for 3 jobs.
And is it still the same boat trip? You still get on a boat in the UK and go all the way down, or do you just fly to the Falklands and hop across on a little boat?
I think I've been told that they mostly fly down to the Falklands and then they fly onwards. In fact, not all of them. So I think some go down on the boat still.
Yeah, I think some of the part of the amazing journey for you here is the emulating Shackleton and Scott, that you were on the boat. I mean, Scott went to New Zealand and went around that way, so it's not quite the same. But even still, setting off on this journey, I presume you didn't have 25 goats, 6 sheep, and some chickens, but it must have felt very similar to that back then. One of the things that Dave and I in the office were just musing on as you were talking is that it's been, 35 years plus since you went, and you remember the names of all the dogs. I can barely remember the name of my children, but you can remember all the names of those dogs. That's quite amazing.
I practiced, but it is true. In fact, you do remember them. It is quite ridiculous. And I went down there as a non-dog person. And obviously you're the vet once you're there. And so I went to a vet up here and all he had was a Pekingese with diarrhea. So I didn't learn a lot.
And also, I mean, you saw that beautiful picture of the tent and the dogs and the sledge, and just the silhouette in the background. And that picture could have been taken now, 35 years ago, 100 years ago. That truly an unspoilt landscape, like I suspect nowhere else in the world.
I totally agree with you. And So just something I hadn't mentioned, just because it makes me think of it, is that ice cores are a big deal in the Antarctic research, and so they often do ice cores, and ice comes up, and the fast one, the reason why they can do those lovely CO2 graphs and show the CO2 going up is because the bubbles in the ice are the atmosphere at that time. So they drill down to 1066 or whatever it is, and get their ice core and then measure things. But it looks beautifully unspoiled, but I suppose those bubbles do actually reflect that we've done something to this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the global warming stuff. Just 2011, the warnings, and here we are, about to enter 13 years later, and people are still arguing about whether it's real or it's not, and yet the weather systems and the weather that's changed, the clear evidence of the polar ice cap melting, never mind the Antarctic. So I mean, I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I always say when people talk about grand rounds, we try to keep things as varied as possible. They don't have to be science heavy. I don't think you did you show a graph? I'm not sure if you showed a graph. Doesn't have to be graphs, doesn't have to be tables, and it just has to be interesting. And I do have trainees ask me about expedition medicine. We don't have an expedition medicine lead, and there's no CCT in expedition medicine to fulfill in Scotland. So it's things like this which can be really valuable, and I will certainly be signposting people to come and watch both your videos, Phil. The one from last month and this one as well. I feel the cold pretty much. During that talk, I had to put my under desk heater on to keep warm. So I think I'd be pretty stuffed out there. And from going out on the bike, I like to wrap up warm. But what an amazing experience for you. And I suspect it was very nice to go back through the pictures and reminisce in preparation for the talk. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did here. There's nothing in the chat, so I don't think there's any questions. No hands up. It is 20 minutes for me to recover before clinic. And it's time for your gin and tonic, Phil. So thanks everybody for coming. It's Christmas now. We have a break. We're back in the middle of January. Jonathan O'Riordan, who's in the audience right now, is starting things off, I believe, with a talk about concussion syndromes, which will be fascinating. We had a talk, I'm going to say 2016, from one of our orthopedic surgeon colleagues about concussion in rugby playing in children and adolescents. So we do come back round full circle again to hear about concussion syndromes and the work that Jonathan O'Riordan is doing in neurology. So I'll try and look out the talk from years ago and see if we can link it so we can see how things have changed. And then I've got a lot of empty spaces, loads of empty slots going through January, February into March. So if you have a talk, and I know Dietmar's here as well, and I've got your email, so we'll slot you in for absolutely certain. But if you do have a talk, then let me know, and we'll fill those slots and continue Grand Rounds as it enters into its 12th year of me doing this, believe it or not, 12 years. So thank you very much for everyone who's ever tuned in, everyone who's turned up, anyone who's watching on YouTube, and particularly to those people who have given talks, particularly this year. And Phil, you win the prize because you've given two. So thanks very much to everyone. Have a great Christmas, and I'll see you in 2024.